welcome to our lesson on uneven development. Today we'll basically be looking at the following three key takeaways. So to describe characteristics that can hinder a country from developing, to explain how these features will be able to hold them back, how it actually contributes to it, and then to categorize them between human and physical causes. Okay, so if you have a pen and paper ready to jot down some notes, that would be fantastic. So first of all, what do we mean by uneven development? So if you have a little look at the picture at the top, we've basically got an image that shows how the world is kind of divided. Now this is constantly changing, so it was initially drawn up a while back. However, now there are countries that are transitioning into more developed nations. Okay, but we can see how the world is divided, and typically you might have wealthier countries. So if we look at USA over here, that is in the blue, that's a high income country or developed nation. That's where we are in the UK. And an anomaly would have been New Zealand and Australia down here. Okay, if we look at the other side, so developing nations, okay, we would be classing Brazil as developing, although that is changing rapidly. Then we'd also include countries like Madagascar as well, okay, Indonesia. So these are how it used to be categorized between high income and low income countries. Okay, so we'll just jot this down so we have it. So typically we'll have high income countries, also known as developed nations, and we would have low income countries, which you can see on the bottom left, also known as developing nations. Okay, and there'll be certain characteristics that would have helped divide this line, okay, or create this line in the first place. So if we have a little look, if we're in a developed nation, okay, then there'll be certain things that would categorize a developed nation, certain indicators that would show that it will be more developed. Okay, so it might be things like higher GDP, which is gross domestic product. Okay, so that's the wealth of the nation. It might be higher literacy rates, so ability to read and write. It might be better healthcare, so maybe more access to fresh water, so high access to clean water even. Okay, maybe fewer patients per doctor. Okay, and if we look at the developing nations, they would have opposite things. So they would have a lower GDP. Okay, the wealth of the country would be much less. We would also have lower literacy rates, so the ability to read and write would be less. They would have a lower access to clean water, and they would have more patients per doctor. Okay, so these are certain characteristics that help divide this line between developing and developed nations. However, this is constantly changing, so this was how it was initially seen. Now it'll probably be a little bit different to that. Okay, so development is basically how far along, how well progressed a country is. High income countries are more developed, low income countries are developing or less developed, but they're in the transition to becoming to progressing and improving the quality of life of their people. But in the meantime, these kind of categories or indicators are things that we're looking for that will show whether a country is developed or developing. So what we'll do, we'll move into looking some of the characteristics, and we'll focus on our low income countries. Okay, those are the ones that we're going to be really focused on for actually why that development gap exists, why some countries have not developed as fast as others. So that's what we're going to go on to. Okay. So there are 6 images up there. You might be able to come up with a few. Okay. And we might be able to try and explain why these may have caused a gap. Okay. So obviously you might have your own ideas from looking at these pictures. There are 6. In reality, there are so many more than 6, but we just want to put a few ideas out there. So initially, right at the very top, okay, we can see countries that have suffered from war or conflict. They will be held back, okay? Or it could be civil war, okay? So that's what our first image represents. The second one's a little bit trickier, okay? So this is a completely barren place, but you've got that visualization of water. So this is being a landlocked nation. Which isn't through choice, but it's what people are stuck with. Okay. The third image, now this can be put down as exploitation, sometimes for resources, which can still in a way happen today. Now below we can see that there is a deal happening above and below the table. So this is sometimes illegal or immoral choices, so corruption. So things happening that shouldn't morally be happening. Then if we move on, the next one we can see devastation. So these can be down to any really natural disasters. I'll just put down earthquakes as an example. And the final one, we can see that dry ground, really tough conditions, maybe a lack of water. So we can put down perhaps a difficult climate, difficult climatic conditions. Okay. Now with each of these, now we've got these ideas in our head, now we want to try and develop them. So try to explain why they might hold back a country. Okay. Now with conflict, obviously there's going to be disruption to lives and businesses. Okay. There can be cost of damage as well. And these are all the things that are stopping that progression forward. When people are fighting against each other, they're not pushing forward as a country in the right direction. Okay, so disruption to people's lives, maybe there'll be death toll, maybe there'll be evacuation. Businesses won't be enticed to operate fully. It will incur damage that has to be spent to repair, and it will basically avoid investors coming in. Okay, and if investors don't come in, then ultimately that country will never have the possibility to kind of get out of that situation. Okay, investors will bring business, they'll bring money to that area. Okay, and without that, with that conflict, it will always hold it back. So if we look at the next one, so being landlocked, okay, obviously you have no coasts, so no coastline means trade is more difficult. Okay, so trade becomes more difficult, and sometimes tariffs have to be spent to get a good through a country. Okay, are made as goods travel through other countries. So already that nation is making less on their product because they are landlocked. Okay, so they're having difficulties to trade, buy and sell from different countries, perhaps importing goods, perhaps exporting as well. So being landlocked will limit the trade that a country can have internationally. Okay, and it already puts it on a back foot. It's not the be all and end all, but it's a massive contribution. So exploitation. So this has happened in the past with colonialization, and this is when tends to be when European countries took rule or ownership of other nations, and basically they were exploiting the country and the resources that it had. Okay, so in the past it was colonialization. Okay, but resources were taken back to host nation with uh, with the country not benefiting greatly. So the resources have been exploited. The wealth went back to the host nations, so went back to the countries where where they were colonialized or the empire was originating from, tend to be European countries. And that meant the host nation on this little cartoon, it was Africa as a continent. Many of them have been colonialized, but many of them lost out because of that. They didn't benefit and they lost out on that wealth. So corruption. So this we can see money passing hands. So this can result in illegal activity. Okay, so you can result in illegal activity within the country, but also money can be lost. So along the way where money comes in, whether it's through aid, but corruption can mean that money can go missing and it can go into the wrong hands, so it doesn't get spent on the nation. So it can be lost, it can be siphoned off, and therefore this valuable money isn't being spent on the country's development. Okay, so it's not investing in road or infrastructure or electricity or business. It's basically going in the wrong hands, in the wrong pockets. Okay, so that wealth is being lost. Okay, so natural disasters, these can be anything. Okay, so it depends on where a country is. So you can have earthquakes, tropical storms, volcanoes, just as a few examples. But now we're also starting to include climate change, which is having a massive impact on some nations. Okay, but we'll come on that more in the next one. Okay, and similar to conflict, this creates a huge amount of damage and disruption. So the country is always trying to get back to the level where it was before, okay, without being able to progress or develop more into the future. Okay, so earthquakes, natural disasters will be a massive hit to the country, and then it's just a case of them trying to develop to get back to where they were before. So it's this constant state of disruption and then rebuilding without actually progressing forward. And then our final one, So this is the climatic conditions. So we can have, obviously climate is made up of temperature and rainfall over a long period of time, but we can have um, extreme temperatures that can lead to drought. Now, drought is where there's a lack of rainfall. So extreme temperatures and lack of rainfall, got to put that in, that can lead to drought and crop failure. So it means that that could, in theory, it can trigger a famine, okay, where there's not enough food for people to go around. So these extremes, climatic conditions, maybe it might be too much rainfall that will cause a flood in the area, okay? Maybe it'll be more extreme weather from happening, like tropical storms, okay? But from that picture, we're looking at aridity, so dryness, dry lands, and that can be really difficult to farm, and any crops or food that is being farmed, that can fail, and we could trigger a famine, and ultimately that country basically can't supply enough for itself, so it's always going to be dependent on other nations, okay? And that means that it will never be able to progress forward until it can be truly self-sufficient, okay? So extreme temperatures, lack of rainfall, those difficult climatic conditions can really hold back the nation. So these are just six. Ultimately, the world's not that simple, and there are a huge number of different factors that will play a role in this. Okay, so what we'll do, we'll look at these and we'll just categorize them between human and physical and natural factors. So these were the causes, so let's move on to the next one. So are they human or physical? Are they man-made or natural factors? So what we'll do, we will highlight the human as red, and the physical, the natural stuff, we'll highlight as green. So, so being landlocked, I guess, is the man-made border that's created. The countries are man-made, but it's going to be one of your physical, natural factors that you are stuck with. Okay, so that's got to be natural. If we look at war, that is human or man-driven. Okay, war is a conflict driven by people. Okay, so that's a man-made cause or a human cause. Then if we look at exploitation, colonialism, we are looking at a man-made cause again, something that man has created to hold back that nation. Corruption, it's only people that can be corrupt, so therefore it's another man-made cause, which means our final two, the natural hazards, these are natural things. It just so happens to be where your country is, but these are natural occurring events, so therefore it's just the luck of the draw where your country is. And climatic conditions, these are the physical climatic conditions of your nation. Okay, it might worth be just bearing in mind that this can be altered by man. Okay, so in terms of if we are considering climate change, we can probably add in a little bit of orange if we add into climate change on top of that. So it can be man enhanced, but the climate is a natural factor. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So it's man-made, man-driven reasons, but also natural causes for why some countries might be less developed than others. So then we'll just have a quick summary of what we looked at before the end. So back to our three key takeaways. We wanted to describe the characteristics that can hinder development. So we were looking at landlocked, the difficult climate, natural hazards, corruption, war, and exploitation of a nation. To explain how they hold them back. So being landlocked makes trade difficult. Climate can trigger famine through drought. Disasters hold back progress because the country is always trying to develop back to its original point, and that's the same with war as well. Corruption avoids investment of money in the right areas, means money is lost or it goes into the wrong hands, and resources are exploited, which means potential gains the country could have had will be lost. Okay, so they'll be further behind. And then we divided them between human and physical. So the natural were climate, natural disasters, and being landlocked. The human categories were corruption, exploitation, and war. So hopefully that was useful for you. Thank you very much for listening and enjoy the rest of your day.